All right. You will hear this word longevity risk quite a bit when you're talking about retirement and thinking about sort of what your options are in retirement. And, I think it's best easily explained by thinking about if you take yourself and you start to look at your kind of immediate family and kind of move out, you can kind of get a feel for longevity risk. So when I think about my four grandparents, I had a grandmother that had a stroke, so she lived alone, or she lived with her husband up until that point. But she did spend the last week of her life in a hospital. As we were making kind of final arrangement decisions and trying to figure out, the full impact of the stroke, which was pretty devastating. So, we had that situation. My grandfather, on the other hand, fell when he was much older, sort of end of life, and he hit his head and sort of had about 30 days of deterioration before he ultimately passed, right? And so, he had that situation, and so ultimately he had that, and then on my other side, I had another stroke, and there was about a week of issues there, and then I had a grandmother who died of colon cancer, and she spent probably her last 30 to 60 days in hospital. And then ultimately, in today's world, she probably would have gone to hospice for some period of time. But this was before, that was common, right? And then I have a bunch of great aunts and uncles. When I go around and look, I have one aunt who's got dementia, and she's in assisted living, and she's probably been there a couple years and probably will be there for the rest of her life. I have two very elderly aunts and uncles who are still living alone, but they do have people that come into the home to support them, right? And so and they've had that for probably 5 years at this point, given sort of their health condition. So when you think about all the different permutations of things that can happen to you, we're talking about, what are the risks? Who's going to pay for it, right? And and how do you have the best life? I think my grandfather used to say he was completely happy until he was about 85 years old, right? And after 85, I think he started to have deterioration. He drove for a very long time, so I think he probably drove until almost 90, right? So he said he had a pretty great life until 85 or so, but after 90, he said it was pretty terrible, and those terrible years for him were challenging, right? And so that's part of the longevity risk, is that we don't know how many of those years are going to be good. We kind of think we're all in pretty good health for some period of time, but then things happen, and so we got to be prepared for that. And there's a whole bunch of ways we can kind of prepare for that. But one of the most important ways is to make sure that either from a Social Security perspective that you're covered, or from an asset perspective you're covered, or from an insurance perspective you're covered, right? Because each and every one of those outcomes requires income or assets or Medicaid. So that's what when we talk about those, and each one of those requires some planning and some activities associated with it. So we need to be aware of that and kind of think about that.